In 1962, a factory in Tanzania experienced an outbreak of uncontrollable laughter that spread to over 1,000 people, forcing the closure of 14 schools and lasting for 6 months. No pathogen was ever identified. No toxin was ever found. The laughter was real. The suffering was genuine. But the cause was not biological. It was psychological, and it revealed something deeply unsettling about the human mind. Under the right conditions, reality itself becomes negotiable when you're a part of a crowd. Imagine waking up tomorrow and feeling a strange numbness in your fingers. By noon, your coworkers are reporting the same sensation. By evening, hundreds of people in your city are in emergency rooms with identical symptoms. Doctors find nothing wrong. Tests reveal no toxins, no viruses, no physical cause whatsoever. But the symptoms are undeniably real. The fear is spreading faster than any disease, and you are about to learn that. Your rational, individual mind is far more fragile than you ever imagined when it encounters the psychological gravity of collective belief. The human brain did not evolve for truth. It evolved for survival. And one of the most powerful survival mechanisms embedded in our neurology is the ability to synchronize with the group. Our ancestors who trusted the collective assessment of danger, who ran when others ran without stopping to independently verify the threat, were the ones who survived long enough to pass on their genes. The ones who paused to think critically, who demanded evidence before reacting, were the ones who got eaten. We are the descendants of people whose brains prioritized social conformity over individual analysis. And that ancient wiring still governs us in ways we desperately want to deny. Mass hysteria, known clinically as mass psychogenic illness, represents one of the most disturbing demonstrations of how thoroughly our perception of reality is shaped by social context rather than objective input. It occurs when groups of people develop real, measurable physical or psychological symptoms without any identifiable organic cause. These are not people pretending to be ill. They are not malingerers or actors. They are experiencing genuine distress, genuine symptoms, genuine suffering. But the cause is not external. It is internal and collective. It is the mind creating physical reality through the mechanism of social contagion. The medical literature documents hundreds of cases across centuries and cultures. In 1518, in Strasbourg, a woman began dancing in the street and could not stop. Within a month, around 400 people had joined her, dancing until they collapsed from exhaustion, some dying from heart attacks and strokes. In 1983, workers at a data entry facility in the United States began experiencing headaches, nausea, and respiratory problems they attributed to toxic fumes. Extensive environmental testing found nothing. The building was clean, but the symptoms were undeniable and spread to dozens of employees before the facility closed. In 2011, in upstate New York, teenage girls at a high school began developing uncontrollable tics, verbal outbursts, and seizure-like episodes. Neurological examinations found no organic cause. Environmental assessments found no toxins. Yet the symptoms spread to nearly 20 students, generating national media attention and widespread panic about everything from vaccines to contaminated water. The actual cause, according to medical consensus, was mass psychogenic illness triggered by stress and amplified by social media. But to the girls experiencing it, to their families, to their community, the explanation felt inadequate because the suffering was so viscerally real. This disconnect between the reality of symptoms and the absence of physical cause reveals something profoundly uncomfortable about the nature of consciousness. We like to believe that physical sensations are objective, that pain is pain regardless of its source, that our bodies tell us truth about the external world. But neuroscience has demonstrated repeatedly that the experience of sensation is constructed by the brain based on expectation, context, and social cues as much as it is based on actual sensory input. The placebo effect is the most well-known example of this principle. Give someone a sugar pill and tell them it will reduce their pain, and for a significant percentage of people, it actually does. Brain imaging studies show that placebo analgesia activates the same neural pathways as pharmacological pain relief. The pain reduction is not imaginary. It is measurably real. The brain, convinced that relief is coming, produces that relief chemically. The expectation becomes the reality. Mass hysteria operates on the same principle, but in reverse, and amplified by social dynamics. If the brain can produce relief based on expectation, it can also produce symptoms. If one person in a group develops a headache and attributes it to a gas leak, others become hypervigilant to any sensation that might confirm that threat. A slight dizziness from standing up too quickly, normally ignored, suddenly becomes evidence of poisoning. A common tension headache, usually dismissed, becomes a neurological emergency. The brain, primed to detect danger, begins generating the very symptoms it fears. And because humans are profoundly social creatures, we are neurologically wired to mirror the distress we observe in others. The mirror neuron system, discovered in the 1990s, revealed that specific neurons in the brain activate both when we perform an action and we observe someone else performing that action. This neural mirroring extends to emotions and even to physical sensations. When you see someone in pain, regions of your brain associated with pain activate in response. This is the neurological basis of empathy. It is also the mechanism through which spread in mass psychogenic events. You see someone collapse. Your brain simulates that collapse under the right conditions of stress, suggestibility, and perceived threat. That simulation can become so intense that your body begins to manifest the symptoms you are observing. The sociologist Robert Bartholomew has spent studying mass hysteria and has identified consistent patterns across cases. These events almost always occur in enclosed social groups under sustained stress. Schools, workplaces, communities, military units. They disproportionately affect individuals with less power in social hierarchies, often young women or marginalized workers. They emerge in contexts where people feel a lack of control over their circumstances and where there is an existing framework, cultural or situational, that makes the symptoms make sense within the group's worldview. Consider the dancing plague of Strasbourg. This occurred during a period of intense social stress, famine, and disease. The prevailing belief system included the idea that saints could curse people with compulsive dancing as punishment for sin. When the first woman began dancing, her behavior, however bizarre, fit within an existing cultural narrative. Others, under similar stress and sharing the same belief system, found their own bodies compelled into the same pattern. The behavior spread not because it was rational, but because it was culturally coherent, and because the social conditions created a psychological vulnerability that makes contagion possible. In more modern cases, the framework shifts, but the mechanism remains constant. The girls in New York attributed their symptoms to environmental causes, to medical conditions, like pandas, or to vaccine injury. Explanations that made sense within contemporary frameworks of health anxiety and institutional distrust. The data entry workers attributed their symptoms to chemical exposure because they worked in a sealed building with poor ventilation and had legitimate anxieties about workplace safety. The explanation fit the context. And once an explanation takes hold in a stress group, the mind begins producing evidence to support it. This is where mass hysteria intersects with a broader and more disturbing phenomenon that psychologists call collective delusion. While mass psychogenic illness involves physical symptoms, collective delusion involves shared false beliefs that entire groups come to accept as unquestionable reality despite contradictory evidence. History is littered with examples. The witch trials of early modern Europe and colonial America, where entire communities became convinced that their neighbors were engaged in supernatural evil. The satanic panic of the 1980s, where thousands of people came to believe in vast underground networks of ritual abuse that never existed. The various financial bubbles throughout history where intelligent people collectively convinced themselves that tulip bulbs, or tech stocks, or real estate could only increase in value forever. In each case, the mechanism is similar. A seed idea, often introduced by a perceived authority or arising from ambient cultural anxiety, takes root in a community. Early adopters of the belief experience social reinforcement. They're taken seriously, they receive attention, they're validated by others who share the concern. This creates a feedback loop. More people adopt the belief because they see others adopting it. The belief becomes socially costly to question. Doubt is interpreted as betrayal, as ignorance, as complicity with whatever threat the belief identifies. And because humans are social primates whose survival has always depended on group cohesion, we are neurologically biased toward conformity over. Solomon Asch demonstrated this bias in his famous conformity experiments. In the 1950s, he showed participants a line and to identify which of three other lines matched its length. The task was trivially easy, but Asch planted Confederates in the group who deliberately gave wrong answers. The results were disturbing. Approximately 75% of participants conformed to the group's incorrect judgment at least once, even though the right answer was obvious. When interviewed afterward, many participants said they knew the group was wrong, but went along to avoid standing out. Others said they genuinely began to doubt their own perception when it conflicted with the unanimous group response. This is the psychological architecture that makes mass hysteria and collective delusion possible. We do not perceive reality as isolated individuals and then compare notes with others. We perceive reality as fundamentally social beings whose brains are constantly calibrating individual perception against group consensus. When the two conflict, the brain experiences profound discomfort, and the path of least resistance is usually to adjust individual perception to match the group rather than to maintain a lonely stand on principle. The power of this conformity pressure escalates dramatically in conditions of uncertainty and fear. When people do not know what is happening, when they feel threatened, when authoritative sources provide conflicting information, the need for consensus becomes psychologically overwhelming. The group becomes the primary source of reality definition. If everyone around you says they smell gas, you will start to smell gas even if the air is clean. If everyone around you says they feel sick, you will start to feel sick even if you were fine moments before. The mind fills in the gaps, generates the expected sensations, and convinces you that you are discovering rather than creating the symptoms. Social media has accelerated this process to a degree that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. In historical cases of mass hysteria, contagion was limited by physical proximity. You had to be in the same room, the same building, the same town to be infected by the collective belief. But digital communication removes that constraint. Now, a teenager in California can observe symptoms in a teenager in New York, and the mirroring can occur across thousands of miles instantaneously. The psychological contagion that once required face-to-face contact now spreads at the speed of a video upload. This has profound implications. We're seeing clusters of young people, primarily girls, developing sudden onset tic disorders that closely resemble Tourette syndrome but lack the typical developmental trajectory of that condition. Neurologists have noted that these tics often mirror specific patterns seen in popular social media videos created by influencers who actually have Tourette syndrome. The brain, observing these behaviors repeatedly, begins to reproduce them. The symptoms are not consciously faked. They are unconsciously generated through the same mirroring mechanisms that have always existed in human neurology, but now operating in a digital environment that provides unlimited access to models of distress. The ethical and epistemological challenges this creates are staggering. How do you help someone whose symptoms are real but have no organic cause? Telling them it is all in their head is not only cruel but inaccurate. The symptoms are in their body. The suffering is genuine. The fact that the cause is psychological rather than physiological does not diminish the reality of the experience. But treating the symptoms medically without addressing the underlying psychosocial dynamics often fails because you're treating the manifestation rather than the source. More troubling still, how do you interrupt a collective delusion once it has taken hold? Any attempt to challenge the group belief is interpreted through the framework of the belief itself. If a community believes they are being poisoned, and you present evidence that no poison exists, they will interpret your denial as part of the conspiracy to hide the poisoning. If a group believes in a particular threat, and you offer an alternative explanation, they will see you as either naive or complicit. The delusion becomes self-sealing, immune to correction from outside because outside sources have already been defined as untrustworthy within the logic of the delusion. This is not a failure of individual intelligence. Many people caught in collective delusions are highly educated, thoughtful, and capable of critical reasoning in other contexts, but those capacities are overridden by the psychological need for social belonging and the neurological architecture that prioritizes group consensus over individual assessment. You can be brilliant in isolation and completely captured by collective irrationality when embedded in the right social context under the right conditions of stress and uncertainty. The historical record suggests that collective delusions tend to burn themselves out rather than being rationally dismantled. The witch trials ended not because everyone suddenly realized witchcraft was impossible, but because the accusations spread to include people with enough social power to halt the proceedings. The satanic panic faded not because evidence proved the claims false, but because the sheer volume of accusations made the whole framework untenable, and attention shifted elsewhere. Financial bubbles burst when they run out of new believers to sustain them, not because people suddenly become rational about value. This pattern implies something deeply unsettling about human collective psychology. We may not be capable of reasoning our way out of mass delusions. We may simply have to wait for them to exhaust themselves while minimizing the harm they cause in the meantime. And in an age where digital technology allows for unprecedented speed and scale of psychological contagion, where algorithmic amplification rewards the most emotionally engaging content regardless of its truth value, where social fragmentation creates countless isolated communities, each with their own reality, the potential for mass hysteria and collective delusion has never been greater. Consider what happens when you combine the mirror neuron system with social media algorithms designed to maximize engagement. The algorithm learns that content depicting distress, fear, and crisis generates more clicks, more shares, more time on platform. So it amplifies that content. Users are exposed to a constant stream of others in various states of emotional and physical distress. The brain, built to mirror what it observes, begins generating sympathetic responses. Those responses get posted, generating more content depicting distress, which the algorithm amplifies further. You create a feedback loop of psychological contagion operating at global scale and in human speed. We're already seeing the effects. Anxiety and depression rates, particularly among young people, have skyrocketed in correlation with social media adoption. Clusters of self-diagnosed mental health conditions spread through online communities, with epidemiological patterns that resemble contagion more than independent discovery. Belief in various conspiracy theories, each community reinforcing its own version of reality, flourishes in algorithmically curated bubbles where contradictory information is systematically filtered out. We are not experiencing isolated incidents of mass hysteria. We are living inside a global infrastructure optimized to produce it. The question then becomes not can this happen, but how do we maintain grasp on shared reality when the technological and psychological conditions favor collective delusion? How do you trust your own perceptions when you know they are so heavily influenced by social context? How do you distinguish between genuine insight shared by a community and mass hysteria spreading through that community? How do you balance the need for social belonging with the need for individual clarity? There are no easy answers, but there are principles worth considering. The first is cultivating awareness of your own suggestibility. You are not immune to social contagion. No one is. Recognizing that your perception is malleable, that your symptoms can be psychologically generated, that your beliefs are shaped by your social environment is not a weakness. It is a basic acknowledgement of how human neurology actually functions. The people most vulnerable to collective delusion are often those most confident in their immunity to it. The second principle is diversifying your information sources and social circles. If everyone you interact with shares the same fears, the same interpretations, the same explanations for ambiguous events, you're living inside an echo chamber, where collective delusion becomes statistically likely. Deliberately seeking out perspectives that challenge your assumptions, engaging with people who see the world differently, creates friction that can interrupt the smooth spread of contagious belief. The third principle is distinguishing between the reality of an experience and the validity of an explanation for that experience. Symptoms can be real while the attributed cause is wrong. Suffering can be genuine while the narrative around that suffering is socially constructed. Acknowledging this does not invalidate the experience. It opens the possibility of finding explanations and solutions that actually address the source rather than chasing phantom causes. The fourth principle is humility about the limits of individual perception and collective judgment. History has shown repeatedly that large groups of intelligent, well-meaning people can be catastrophically wrong. That entire societies can share delusions that later generations find incomprehensible. We are not smarter than our ancestors. We are not less vulnerable to the same psychological mechanisms. The specific content of our collective delusions may differ, but the underlying dynamics remain constant. Your mind is not a fortress. It is a democracy, where the votes of everyone around you count as much as your own perception. Under the right conditions of stress, uncertainty, and social pressure, you'll believe things that are not true, experience symptoms that have no organic cause, and participate in collective realities that dissolve the moment. The social context changes. The crowd does not steal your reason. You give it away willingly because being wrong together feels safer than being right alone. And that ancient survival mechanism, that desperate need to synchronize with the group, is still running your brain whether you Acknowledge it or not. If this exploration of collective psychology disturbed you, share it with someone who trusts. Crowd's too much. Subscribe for more investigations into the mechanisms that govern human behavior beneath the level of conscious awareness, and pay attention to what beliefs you hold, primarily because everyone around you holds them. The line between reasonable consensus and mass delusion is thinner than you think. Question your certainties, especially the ones that everyone agrees with. Your mind belongs to you only when you defend it from the gravity of collective belief.